I suppose I'll start from the beginning, so you can all get a better idea of what you've been missing out on. It all started in late December of 2013. I was, well, kind of the Walking Dead. My life wasn't going very well, but that's another story. One that we'll get to later, because it's actually very important to a certain someone. But there I was, making War Thunder videos, and trying to ignore the world as hard as I could. Doing what you all seem to like me best for, putting on a show. Playing things that no one seemed to play, and doing things that no one seemed to be able to do in them. All the while making a really grand spectacle or mockery of the whole thing. A quality that I eventually learned is, well, just me, and it radiates through everything that I do. I just seem to have inexhaustible supplies of enthusiasm for drama, comedy, and theatrics. And a certain need to be the center of attention. Yeah, you could call me an attention whore, but I at least tried to deserve the attention. Which worked out because I got noticed. The short version of it is, I met a guy who said he could show me things, and then I found myself in a seance with a couple of witches, or some very magical girls. The longer and more colorful version of it is, I met a guy who was really good at getting into places, who knew his way around a wall or two, which is to say he was really good at making doors. He was a studying engineer, a German engineer, and he found his way to me through my videos and my posts on the War Thunder General forums on V. And he came to me with a request. He had seen my videos and was wondering if I could do something for the VGAs that year. Meanwhile, I was at the end of my rope. Like I said before, my life up to that point wasn't going very well. And the only time I wasn't depressed up to my eyeballs was when I was playing video games and making videos about them. About a year prior to that, there had been a fire in my house. Nobody got hurt, but we were all displaced by it. And in some ways, it was probably the best thing that ever happened. Even though moving 3 times in 1 year is not something that's fun or should ever be experienced by any sane person. At the time I met my engineer friend, the damage had mostly been repaired, but I was still living with my mother, and sharing a room with my 2 brothers that was the size of a shoebox. I could sit here and talk to you for days about everything that was going on in that house, but I'll just skip over and say, it was a shit time. It was a really shit time. Probably the worst years of my life. Everything had a way of making me seem like the biggest piece of shit on the planet, and I hadn't grown up with the facilities to fix this problem. I was 23 at the time. I dropped out of high school, but my mother had shoved me into getting my GED in the year prior. Just this statement alone should probably give you a pretty good idea of what kind of person I was, and in a way still am, though I'm getting much better. Thanks to the near constant help of someone very, very important to me now. But I will say it wasn't all my fault. After all, I was only a child. And now I'm only a man. But we'll get to this story in detail because it's actually very important to something I tried later. I only go into it now because me and my engineer friend got to talking about this. One thing led to another. And he told me I needed to move out. I needed to get out of that place, even if it killed me. But I wasn't sure at the time. So I dragged my heels for about a week. And then something happened. I got really, really pissed off at my brother. And then, in a moment, I snapped. I decided right at that moment to pick up my things and then move back into my grandmother's house, the one that had been repaired. It wasn't very far away, but some distance was better than no distance. And in hindsight, it was probably one of the best decisions of my life. Everyone in my family looked at me like I had grown 3 heads, but I moved in one night, and then the next morning my uncle came by, and we hammered my room together. Or, well, I did. He just held a sheetrock. The basement was the one part of the house that hadn't been completely redone yet. But I staked my claim here. I threw all my things down, and I set up shop. I had a place that was reasonably comfortable that I could be alone in, even though the walls weren't painted, and they still aren't painted. And my friend, the engineer, was cheering me on the entire way. From then on, and still to this day, I'm working on making myself a better person. I'm fixing my problems, and getting over them, and becoming an adult. Whatever the fuck that statement means to this generation anyway, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Even after I moved out, I was still in sort of a mental fog, but that fixed itself rather abruptly. But that's going off topic again. But I will say this. I went running. Now we can all get to the part of the story you came here for. Since I was now alone, and away from the prying eyes of my family, for the most part, I could now begin to explore my creativity freely without having to look over my shoulder. Like any good shut-in will tell you, there are reasons why we are such private people. However, through this exploration of creative expression, I've done many things. Most of them good, some of them really bad, and some that are in between and kind of hard to pin down. I'm going to talk to you about most of them, but we'll begin with the first one. A man by the name of Marlowe Saint, or, as I like to call him, the Showman. Or at least his first trial run. As I learned, being a writer means that not all of your ideas are going to work, but you're free to take them, pick them over, and redo them over and over again until you find a spot for them. Now, even though I said I was going to talk to you about my pen and paper adventures, the Showman isn't in any of them. But he's still very important. Why? Because it was my first attempt at actually writing something seriously. Though I know full well that that statement is going to ring kind of funny as I start to explain it. But, sue me, I was in a good mood and I was experimenting. Even though at some point I thought I ran the goddamn world. Which, in some cases, is kind of good. But in most of them, really, really bad. And I'm eternally thankful that I had much smarter people there to stop me from making an ass of myself. I know I'm gonna look like a complete fucking moron with some of the shit that's gonna come out of my mouth about this. But I'm gonna try anyway. Because these events actually directly led into all of the other stories that I'm going to get to. And most of them are a lot better. But oh boy, where do I begin with this one? How about ice cream?
You, sir. Say ice cream.
Well, ice cream, but I don't sing if that's what you mean.
Talk then. Down here, ice cream.
Ice cream.
Talk slow.
Ice cream.
You see? Singing is just sustained talking. Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir. Ice cream.
Yeah, singing is sustained talking. But so is bullshit. And I may be being a bit unfair to my own ideas, but that's what I thought I started writing. We at least started out with a good idea. My engineer friend was still helping me at this point, and he's also partially responsible for letting me do this. And also for a whole lot of other things. Most of the other things being good, I promise. But how this all began is, my engineer friend showed me Magical Girl Noir Quest, which is just a glorious combination of anime shit and TG culture, if I'm going to be brief about it. You're free to go start reading and join D-Culture's magical ride. And remember, I encouraged you to a while ago. But this is the thing that started me on the path to becoming a writer. But while I was reading along with this magical adventure, my engineer friend brought to me one of his grievances. He was a fan of this too, but he had one small, burning issue that he then brought to me, and we both actually sat down for a while and talked about this little problem. How do we get a dude in here? And a normal dude, not a magical girl. Boy, girl. You get the idea. This garden of lilies was so thick that they had started growing extra appendages to satisfy their other urges. So this felt like a noble cause. I mean, we're in on the joke, we can enjoy pure love as much as the next fucking weeb, but still. Can we do something more? And yes, it turned out, we could do more. We could do a lot more. However, nobody really taught either of us how to follow tone. So with Magical Girl Noir Quest throwing a piece of paper under me that said, hey, why not writing? And me being in probably the best mood of my life, we got to work. Or I did. If I'm going to be completely honest about the situation, I did most of the work, for better or worse. And my German engineer friend just sort of backseat drove for a while. Which left me, the person who didn't know how to write at that time, and is still not very good, to write the whole story by himself. This had the expected results. There wasn't really a story. There were a lot of vague ideas, and a rough draft, but the story never really materialized into anything physical. Well, it did, but those were all fragments, scenes, general ideas, characters, potential plot points, you know, that kind of thing. Just notes, without any real structure at all. The Showman was a ball of ideas, rather than a character. However, while the story itself never materialized in its complete form, I still wrote things in isolation. Small things. And no, you can't see them because they're all terrible. But I will tell you about them. It all started one night while I was up too late and not able to sleep. I started madly scribbling something down, sort of captivated by an idea. And that idea became the Showman's death. Yeah, that bodes well. I started a character with him dying. And it was about as melodramatic as you could possibly imagine. I still kind of hate myself for writing it. Basically what I did was, I imagined that I had full control over the entire frame of reference of the quest. Yeah, like that was gonna fucking happen. But still, my infinitely fertile mind went on the task anyway. And I concocted the situation from the point of view of the quest's main character. Again, because I was the director all of a fucking sudden. You remember that time where I said I had an urge to be the center of attention? Yeah, this is one of those times. And it didn't really help my writing. Once you got over the horrible spelling and the horrible grammar and the horrible punctuation to round it all off, what you had was a scene where he gets shot, proceeds to bleed to death, and sing himself off using magic. Singing. It's always goddamn singing. And explosions, but we'll get to that part. But yes, he sung himself off using a magical barbershop quartet which sung Sincere from the Music Man, all while his lover and sweetheart watched him go. Yes, I wrote this with a straight face. And no, I'm not proud of it. But we all have to start somewhere. Unfortunately, and regrettably so, my German engineer friend came to me and told me that this wasn't up to snuff. However, he did like the title of Showman. And this was important because, well, this was the first thing that I put out that someone actually liked. It wasn't all of it, it was just the character's name. However, I had something. I yelled into a dark room and it bounced off a wall back towards me. That was something. The next piece of clearly bestseller material that I wrote down, or imagined, as you'll soon see, or hear, concerned an encounter in an opera theater. Once again, me still having full control over the frame of reference because I am God. There is simply no other explanation for this sudden turn of events. This scene was rather imagination fuel for me. I started to firmly nail down what I thought the Showman looked like in my head. I got a pretty good mental image, one that's stuck to this day. He looks like a gender-bent peacock from Skullgirls. Burgundy suit, top hat, that kind of thing. Basically a stage magician. So this scene, I imagined, would concern the main character walking into an ambush in an opera theater. The Showman would then reveal himself and then play mindfucky games, set to Pink Floyd's In the Flesh, because I was on a Pink Floyd trip at that time, and I'm actually retarded. There's really no other excuse for it. But what would happen then is the main character would appear to shoot the Showman, who would simply laugh it off after a moment. Then continue his magical charade, appear on stage, and then proceed to blow the entire place up. See? What did I tell you? Musical references and explosions. This is how the Showman operates. To assist my writing of the situation, I created this audio file. I'm gonna play it for you now, and you're free to imagine at your leisure the entire scene.
Show to feel the warm thrill of confusion, that space cadet glow. I got some bad news for you, sunshine. Pink isn't well, he stayed back at the hotel and they've sent us along as a surrogate band. We're gonna find out where you fans really stand. Are there any queers in the theater tonight? Get 'em up against the wall. Against the wall. There's one in the spotlight, he don't look right to me. Get him up against the wall. Against the wall. And that one looks Jewish, and that one's a cool. Into the room, there's one smoking a joint, and another with spots. If I had my way, I'd have all that shit. Tell me, is something eluding you, sunshine? Is this not what you expected to see? If you wanna find out what's behind these cold eyes, you'll just have to claw your way through this disguise.
God, am I retarded, but damn do I love theatrics! If I'm going to make a small admittance, listening to that still makes me smile, even though it is completely retarded. The scene itself, of course, was never written down, mainly because I brought it to my engineer friend and he kind of shrugged and said, well, no, I don't know about this, but some of it kind of sounds alright, but most of it doesn't, and there was a lot of indecision going around. Which was good for us, because we're both retarded, and this indecision is sort of a safety mechanism. But I trusted my friend's judgment. Maybe a little too much at the time, but I still trust him to this day, because without him, I wouldn't be anywhere. And he didn't say stop, so this continued. However, it is pretty plain to see that this is completely tone-breaking and would have never fit in the quest itself. But we run the world here in this little dark corner, so we kept going. Which resulted in me making another one of these audio files. To our credit, at this point we were starting to work the Showman down into his own sort of story, in the context of a write-up, so he can be promptly ignored, because who really gives a shit about extended universe material and write fags, right? I jest, of course. However, we started to paint the picture of Showman, or Marlowe, as sort of a fugitive, constantly at war with magical girls, who, if you read MG and Q, are really fucking powerful, and basically answer to no one but themselves. Personally, I'm not knocking the quest at all. This is all par for the course here, and it's perfectly fine for it. However, my engineer friend had a bone to pick with this concept, which is how, eventually, the Showman turned away from magic and started to become a badass normal. A person who would use cunning and deception to accomplish his goals. The magical girls held the day, and he would roam the night, with a song in his heart and a spring in his step, as he laid claymore mines and semtex all over the place. All in this self-imposed crusade against this magical girl and alien cat-imposed patriarchy upon mankind, always needing to be 2 steps ahead of the system, which is where I imagined this second scene. And I actually did begin to write some of it down, and no, you can't see it. I'm taking this shit to my grave. Using the means of imagination you had before, this next scene or story snippet would begin to follow the hunters, the magical girls, as they closed in on the apartment the Showman was hiding out in. And then, predictably, Showman things happen, but we'll get to that. Please, use your imagination. I certainly was. GK. Oh, sorry. But as you can see, going back over the stuff actually does put me in a good mood. Despite how embarrassingly retarded it all is, I still kind of like it. However, a more detailed explanation of what happened in this scene is, a squad of magical girls was closing in on the apartment the showman was hiding out in. And he knew this, of course, because he just does that, and he set a trap for them. What they found was a stuffed mannequin sitting in a chair in the corner that looked oddly like the showman. They approached it and turned it around, and it was wired with explosive, causing the entire apartment to blow up. But don't worry, nobody got hurt. Magical girls are tough, and he evacuated the apartment beforehand with a fumigation notice. What a guy, right? Where was the showman during all of this? Well, like any good escapee, he was a mile away from where you expected him to be. This is actually one of the more clever parts of this scene. The showman, despite everything, wouldn't actually be there to see all the specifics. So, the scene was written in a way where it was him musing about what the magical girls looked like, what they were doing, and the look on their faces as they fell into this trap. The mannequin itself also held something extra, because we're really, really serious about being this stereotypical Batman villain. There was a sign around its neck that said something. What did the sign say? Well, if you were paying attention to the audio file, it actually told you. Yes, bask in the glory of my theatrics. Bask in it! I'm the most clever fucker here! Or at least that's how I felt at the moment. And we all have those moments. Though I can't speak for my writing at this point, you've got to at least admit that my editing skills shine through with these things. I find that I have a need to bring music into fucking everything. Whether it's to add or to compensate for something, it's anyone's guess. But I usually have a pretty damn good internal vision of what the hell I'm doing, even though it rarely makes it out. And if it does, it's usually mangled beyond comprehension. But music powers my imagination, and in a way, it makes me feel powerful. The beginning bit of the audio file is from an Electric Light Orchestra song called Secret Messages, from the album Secret Messages. And the more musically inclined of us will note the rest of the song is The Happiest Days of Our Lives, from, again, Pink Floyd. I was taking this musical thing so damn far that I was actually going to craft audio files for each write-up, to be presented alongside the writing itself. Which is an interesting idea, however, I really needed to learn how to write first. And that's something I'm even still working on. Even though I started rambling about 25 minutes ago, we're still not done, but we're getting there. Shit, this is only the introduction to my other adventures. But let's stay on task. Because God help us, we actually started writing a story for the showman. Well, writing is a really strong word. More like thought a background up for him. And to our credit, we thought really hard. Or at least as far as I know, I did. Again, there's no glory behind that statement. Aside from the stupidity that I wear on my shoulder like a badge of honor. Something very important that I learned through this and all of the other adventures that I'm going to talk about is to like what I like, and not to care what other people really think, or at least not take it too hard. Which is surprisingly hard for some people, me being one of those people. But I like my creations. All of them. Even though my track record for quality is kind of spotty. One of those spots is how we got the showman to be the showman, or at least how we tried to excuse it and reason through it. I thought for hours, days, weeks, and eventually an idea hit me. Taking into consideration the obvious, that the main plot of Magical Girl Noir Quest rides on a lot of Madoka Magica stuff. But of course, as the people who watch the anime know, there are no dudes here. Aside from Madoka's dad, and that really angsty fucker who's really mad he can't whack it, I mean play the violin. But with Sayaka hanging off him like she does, you'd probably think his chances for fingering something are pretty okay. He's gonna make a full recovery, folks. But regardless, he's already accounted for in MG&Q. And Madoka's dad is just kind of there. And nothing really struck me terribly hard about him. Alas, because this is a magical girl anime, only the girls can be magical, and be any important at all. All of the male characters might as well be parts of the scenery and plot devices. But then I noticed something. Madoka's baby brother. I know I'm completely retarded. But let me go on about this, because I'm actually kind of proud of myself that I noticed this. Spoilers, by the way, for Madoka Magica. At the end of the series, while everyone is going Madoka who, and even though the entire world changed for her, Homura still isn't fucking happy, I noticed something very important. It's a wonder what happens when you stare really hard. And as I've been told many times by many people, I overthink the fuck out of everything. But what the hell did I see with the baby that somehow linked him to Marlowe and the Showman? Well, it's what he could see. At the end of the series, you could see him drawing a picture of Madoka in the sand. Which is odd, because Madoka in this universe technically doesn't exist anymore. But in context, it's really quite easy to explain and rather innocuous. When Madoka became God, essentially, she started keeping tabs on certain people, and one of those people was her brother. And then she became a sort of imaginary friend to him, which is kind of sweet. But! This is the part where I either go insane or claim brilliance. Now, I'm not going to spoil MGNQ because I think you should read it, but something that comes up pretty fast is the fact that the main character is actually Homura, and upon ascending to godhood, Madoka turned into a really, really demented, Q-esque, haunting presence, and the basis of a pretty prevalent magical girl religion, or cult. Remember, believe in the Blessed Lady. She can appear to anyone at any time, however, you can't see her unless she wants you to. And this list is limited to the main character, of course, and some supporting characters, all of which she torments on a regular basis. And so, by taking connecting logic from the series, Madoka's baby brother would be the only male that we know about who can actually see her. God help me, I thought I had something. And I still think that using Madoka's brother as a basis for a story is actually a pretty good idea, it's just that it kind of got caught up in this train wreck. Just goes to show you that even in my most stupid, I still have pretty good ideas. Or at least that's what people tell me. So what we had here was a means to make a male character somewhat important. A direct connection to the grim goddess herself isn't something you could really ignore, and I was determined to run with it. You of course need a lot more than this to make someone important in this kind of situation, but God help me, I was going to have my theatrics and I was going to make it make sense. I'm fucking retarded, but I had an idea. So then, an origin story started to take shape. One that was about as convoluted and confusing and clusterfucky as all the other bits that concerned the Showman. But to my bright mind, they made sense. Some fucking how. Through some means that we never actually nailed down, because again, if I'm going to be completely honest, my engineer friend was too busy refuting my own ideas and not really putting too much forward himself, but was still content to sit in a position to fan the idea and keep it going. The now freshly named Marlowe Saint, who had since grown up with a mind that some would question the integrity of based on his drawings of macabre goddess, gains knowledge of magical girls and the Officio system which governs them. What I thought is he actually witnessed a hit by magical girls, in a dark alley somewhere. The magical girls in question also did a piss poor job of sweeping the area for any left behind evidence. Evidence which Marlowe himself discovered, which told him all about the magical girls and their serious business. You know, your MacGuffin tome of knowledge. Also, I'd just like to interject here, we weren't actually going to call him Marlowe in the finalized version of this, but it stuck, and the story never really went very far, so it just stayed there. But anyway, back to Magical Girl Illuminati. Marlowe was of course disturbed by this sight, as any rational person would be, and disturbed even more by the information that he uncovered. And disturbed thrice more when he heard that the murder that he witnessed was written off as a suicide. This whole bit came to me while listening to the song you're now hearing in the background. This is how I work. Put music in, get plot points. Misguided as I may be, I've actually been told that my use of my musical knowledge is like a kaleidoscope into alternate realities. And that just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. Even though it's a rather nice way of saying nobody has any fucking idea what the hell I'm going on about. But they are completely blameless because I do believe myself a rambling madman sometimes. But getting back to the story we were discussing, Marlowe at this point is rather reasonably paranoid, wondering if he did actually make it out of there unnoticed. Wondering if the magical girls are watching him, even now. After all, this conspiracy went from the bottom right to the top. The incubators had their hands in everything, and the chosen instrument of enacting their will were brutally overpowered teenage girls, who were essentially indentured slaves. And some of them were not quite right in the head. And then, his house burns down. which we joked about maybe or maybe not being an accident. But to Marlowe at this point, who was paranoid out of his mind, he took this as a warning. That the magical girls knew, and they were on to him. Yes, this is clearly a warning or an outright attempt on his life. One that he may have narrowly avoided by being out at the time. One of the ideas I had to reason this, aside from the inane reason of he was just out, is that he actually went in to look at one of these Churches of the Blessed Lady, a sometimes literal breeding ground for magical girls. He, of course, at this point only saw the front desk of the operation. His findings at that point were inconclusive. However, it was plainly obvious that some there didn't like him. The obvious reason being, of course, that magical girls are upset when they sense a Y chromosome in their general vicinity. But so at this moment, Marlowe decided to disappear, or really just skulk around for a while before phoning his parents. His adopted parents. And so he went into the night, and this is where another fateful encounter happened. I had no basis for reasoning this, but my mind saw Pinky, Madoka to the rest of you, childishly skipping off the tops of street lamps down a darkened street. Her disarmingly pink and frilly magical girl outfit add contrast to her imposing presence. Or maybe she wasn't imposing to Marlowe. The standing of their relationship was always in flux, and I was never terribly sure about it. In some cases, the showman was an assistant to Madoka, and in some cases, he wasn't. For all of my enthusiasm, at about this time I began to realize that I was playing with God's tools, and I didn't really have control over them. But Madoka's presence was still very clearly there. I mean, it was how we made him important to begin with, even if we didn't have the authority to say these kinds of things. But Marlowe followed her, against his better judgment. He had seen this strange girl before, but he didn't know who she was, or have a name for her. But she was nice, if a bit off-color. But she wasn't specifically beckoning him here. At the moment of speaking, I'm even trying to reason my own ideas, as I try to staple together this story for you. How my mind works is, every time I think about this kind of stuff, an anime starts to play in my head, and I can see it clearly in my mind, and the attempts of my writing is to get down and to describe this image that I am seeing. So, knowing all the dramatic shit that's about to happen next, I could theorize that Pinky was on her way to a funeral. The magical girl funeral that Marlowe was about to walk into himself as well. After all, Madoka always seems to be around when magical girls are dying horribly. So Marlowe makes his way down the street, and then all of a sudden a wall blows out in front of him. He had once again managed to stumble into magical girls while they were on assignment. However, this wasn't going terribly well for the magical girls. Here's where my melodrama comes back out again. So Marlowe finds himself stumbling into this scene. A wrecked bar called the Greenwood, another musical reference, where a fight had broken out between magical girls and mobsters, taking the magical girls by surprise. A deal gone wrong, perhaps. The bar itself had been pretty well and torn apart by the ensuing gunfight. Mobsters were dead left and right, but so were the magical girls. All but one. And I know what some of you are saying. How the hell did a bunch of mobsters kill a bunch of magical girls? Aren't they supposed to be blatantly overpowered and nearly invincible? Well, yes. But these ones were unlucky. And I'll get to that reason why. But the most unlucky one of them all was still alive, though that fact was coming quickly into doubt by the lumbering form of a mobster standing above her with a loaded gun. And this is where the melodrama comes in. Marlowe saw this girl for what she was, just a girl. And then he saw a gun at his feet. So he made the obvious action movie choice, choosing to forgo what he knew in his own paranoia to save a girl. And he pulled the trigger. What a guy. Now, I'm actually going to have to back up here for a moment, because I realize I'm actually getting pretty into this. And to some of you who might think this is good, I'm really making it sound a whole lot better than it was. This is basically the story, as I am telling it to you. It exists in no further detailed form. This is it. Just a summary. It's a pretty good summary, but it's just a summary. But anyway, back to Ace Hotshot and his damsel in distress. So, after bursting onto the scene and saving the girl in distress, Marlowe has a moment to realize what he just did. Despite the ability of the audience to write off a bunch of mean-looking suited gorillas as human beings, he just totally shot someone, and he's not really sure if he's okay with that. Fuck, he was so on edge he pointed the gun at the magical girl as soon as she got up. But thankfully this one was nice. Actually really, really nice. And didn't turn him into paste immediately. And she managed to talk him down. This girl was important. However, we never really came up with a name for her. Near the end of this nonsense, we just called her Girl A. Even though I sunk a whole lot of time into thinking about who she was and what her situation was. It would come to light later that she had a penchant for getting her friends killed. A sort of quantifiable unluckiness. Their relationship I could quantify as, one of them, Marlowe, couldn't really look away from what was going on in the world. And the other, Girl A, was trying to desperately forget it, lest she wind up one day dead in a gutter, or finally break down in despair, and then explode into something that looked like it was out of a coloring book by H.P. Lovecraft. From the bar, Marlowe would be absconded with by a bunch of magical girls who would come very, very late to relieve the fallen squad. What would follow is a lot of tense moments where Marlowe was sitting face to face with the magical girl Illuminati, but through them, he was able to rehumanize them in his own mind that, yeah, they are just a bunch of cute girls doing not really cute things. This, however, is where my stream of consciousness fractures and breaks down. The story here was, well, up for grabs. I had lots of notes going in every fucking direction, most of which concerned Girl A and Marlowe's relationship, and Marlowe looking into things. We never really did get past that and find a way to Showman. We had some vague ideas, and to turn the situation completely on its fucking head, the finish line started to morph in character, to the point where all of that shit beforehand didn't mean anything, and the Showman became a good guy, somehow, to assist in dealing with Pinky. That's where my ideas just got manic, and I'm gripping at straws, really, when I'm trying to remember how the fuck they worked. But Marlowe and Girl A would come to live together at some point, and then, well, things would go on from there. And eventually, he would have to leave to do something. The constraints of that never really materialized. As you can see, I had huge ideas, but I had no writing ability and very little help on the matter, so I was just raving nonsense at a fucking wall. And of course, the end of the story hinged completely on the Showman showing up in the frame of reference, which I couldn't guarantee. And you may have noticed, through the almost 40 minutes that you've been sitting here listening to me ramble, that parts of the story don't really make any sense when you take in what my goal was. Or, like a certain someone, you may be completely unable to tell what my overall goal was in the first place. Which brings us to the Showman's end. I told you my German friend was good at making doors, right? Well, one of the reasons why I was so damn confident that I ran the world was because that he had a line in with everyone else in the quest. And after a while, after I was busy pulling my hair out, he got me, and a certain someone, in the same room. For another reason aside from talking about the Showman. We'll get to that. But this person was important. To say that this person had editing powers was maybe a bit of a stretch, but she held sway. And if I was going to try and make my case to anybody, it would be her. But she didn't have a fucking idea what the hell I was going on about. Which is mainly putting things a little bit too harshly, but not terribly far off the point. She did explain to me that none of this made any fucking sense, and I had more of a stack of ideas rather than an actual story. But she wasn't mean about that. She's actually probably one of the most supportive people I've ever met. But, regardless, I failed. And so ended the Showman. At least for the time being, of course. Remember what I said about writers reusing their ideas over and over again until they fixed them and made them fit somewhere? That comes into play a little later. But this is the end of this story, and the beginning of, well, all of them. When next we meet, I'll be talking about my games. And wait until you hear what my first one was.
I got wild staring eyes, and I got a strong urge to fly, but I got nowhere to fly to.